Hello everyone, my name is Donovan Jones Myers, and I'll be giving you an introduction into philosophical ethics. Now, you're probably wondering, what is philosophical ethics? Well, along those lines, it's really about moral or ethical reasoning, which is just the reasoning to tell if an action is wrong or not. So we're going to be talking about how to determine what makes an action wrong or not, which is very helpful when it comes to different controversial issues. As you'll see, homosexuality and abortion are just a few of some of those controversial issues. Now, before we get into it, you want to be careful not to use right when talking about things being wrong or not. It's easy to say right or wrong, but right is just a little too vague. Where usually it's used in two ways, as permissible or obligatory. Where permissible means not wrong to do, and obligatory means wrong not to do, which are two very different things, and right can mean both. So when you look at the example, eating at the park is permissible, or having friends is permissible. You'll see that you don't want to say eating at the park is wrong not to do. It's okay not to eat at the park, or it's okay not to have friends. And when you look at obligatory, you have the example of it is obligatory for mothers to take care of their children. Here we're saying if mothers don't take care of their children, it would be wrong of them. To say that it is permissible would mean it's okay for mothers not to take care of their children. Now, we'll move on to another term called Primaphasi, a Latin expression that means an action is typically something, or something in most cases. Usually paired with wrong, permissible, and obligatory, we'll just say that something is typically wrong, typically permissible, or typically obligatory. You see it below in the example, when I say, it is prima facie wrong to kill people, meaning it is typically wrong to kill people, or there are specific instances where it won't be wrong. Where an example of that is self-defense. If in the process of being attacked and someone dies in self-defense, then we're saying it is not wrong. And it is an important exception to still say that killing people is wrong, but there are still certain instances where it isn't always. However, it's important to question why think that, meaning what are the reasons behind our beliefs? What are the reasons behind someone else's beliefs? Where you would ask, why do I think homosexuality is wrong or not? Or why do they think abortion is wrong or not? You see, we can't just say something is without a reason. It's about thinking critically, and that's all part of thinking ethically in philosophical ethics. Now, you have the question, what do you mean? Well, this is a matter of clarity and precision, where you have to look at your specific word choice. Where is it vague? Is it the right word? Is it a clear word? Stop. Start. Now, you have what do you mean, which is a matter of clarity and precision, where a lot of times you'll hear different people's statements or claim to why something is, and there can be different points of confusion, where you want to look at the clarity. Are the words they're saying meaning what they're trying to say? When they're describing terms or actions, is it vague or clear what they're trying to say? Meaning, you want to know if something's permissible versus obligatory, versus just saying right. Or defining what a life is in a case like abortion. Or precision, when you're asking, who are you referring to? And what conditions should people do things? An example, where someone asking people to do things, are you saying all versus some? Because that will define whether or not something is true or accurate. Or defining what makes someone have to do something. Like, when do you have to help someone? What conditions need to be in place for it to be permissible or obligatory? Now you're probably wondering, why even do all this? What's the point? We have laws, we have religion, we have tradition, and the beliefs between groups and individuals. But those shouldn't be what determines what's wrong or not for everyone. For example, the law said slavery was legal, and that people couldn't vote because they were black, or because they were a woman. Or if you look at religion, there's different religions that say women are less than men and should submit or be quiet or shouldn't basically have their own thoughts under the control of the man. Or different specific traditions or groups spread hate because they think it's alright and they think that they're wrong. For example, you could look at traditions that cause harm to people, or groups as well, like the KKK or Nazis in Nazi Germany. Or if you look at individual beliefs, just because you think something is right, like stealing something, that doesn't make it right. You have to consider all the people involved, and these groups are too specific to their own interests and initial beliefs. Now, let's come all down to what really builds these points, these reasons to why something is right or wrong, and that is the argument. Now, when I say an argument, I don't just mean people yelling, people just saying back and forth that their point is this, their reason is that. It's very specific in the sense with philosophical arguments, philosophical ethics, moral reasoning, with a conclusion supported by premises, or also stated as premises supporting a conclusion. You can't just have a conclusion, you need to have a reason for it. Like I was saying, why think that? Now an example of that is, air is clear, therefore you can see through air. Now you could just say, you could see through air, but someone might ask, why? Why think that? And you could just say, well, you could just see through air. But that's not proving your point, and that's not giving any clarity to your reasoning. By saying air is clear, you're now giving a reason to why you can see through air. Even still, there are different types of ways to evaluate an argument, where you have the logically valid argument, which refers to an argument that is structured where the premise leads to the conclusion. And another way to say this, if that's not clear, is if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. Like, I'll say that again. If the premises are true, then the conclusion would have to be true. Now, there are different types of structures that make an argument valid. And some three common ones are Modus Ponens, Modus Tollens, and Syllogisms. Now, through all of this, it's important to keep in mind that a logically valid argument is not the same as a true argument. Now, I know I said if the premise is true, then the conclusion is true. That's not saying that the premise is true It's just saying that the premises being true would make the conclusion be true, if that were the case. Now, moving on to our first structure, we have Modus Ponens, where the premise is true and correlates to the conclusion in the argument, and therefore makes the conclusion true, usually in this form. If P, then Q. P is true, so Q is true. Now I'll give this in the context of an example. If the vehicle can drive, it has wheels. It can drive, therefore it has wheels. Now P and Q refer to different qualities of a thing, where we have the vehicle and saying it can drive, which is P, then it has wheels, which is Q. So if the vehicle has P, it has Q. And the next two lines are saying it can drive, P is true, therefore it has wheels, Q is true. Now, this is a format of a logically valid argument. However, like I was saying, just because something's logically valid doesn't mean it is true. And this is an example of an argument that is logically valid, but not true. Because, yes, some vehicles do have wheels, but not all vehicles have wheels. For example, you have tanks with treads, or boats with motors and propellers. For our next structure, you have Modus Tollens, where it tells you that one premise or quality, like I was saying before, is false, which makes the other one false. Again, its usual form, you'll see it's if P, then Q, but not Q, so not P. Meaning, with this being true, it would be true. However, it's not true, so this quality also isn't true. An example of this is, if it is a duck, then it is yellow. It isn't yellow, so it isn't a duck. However, like again, this is another example of something being valid, but not true, because while ducks are yellow, some ducks are yellow. Not all ducks are yellow. You have some green or white, and etc. So you wouldn't say this argument is true, because you couldn't say something isn't a duck just because it isn't yellow. Now, our third common structure for being logically valid is the syllogism, where syllogisms, like a modus ponens, talk about if one quality is something, it means it's another quality, as that additional step of adding a premise to connect the first premise to the conclusion. Because, for example, in my first example of an argument, when I was talking about seeing through air, because air is clear, you could wonder, what about air being clear means that you can see through it? Someone could not understand that connection. That's where a syllogism comes into play. For example, we have Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Or, if someone is a man, then he is mortal. So, Socrates is mortal. Following the format of X is P, all or any P is Q. In the other format, if P, then Q. So, X is Q. Saying that as Socrates being a man, being that first quality, and man being another quality connects Socrates to being that second quality, being mortal, Q, via the second premise, talking about men being mortal, P being Q. Now, let's quickly just clarify what an invalid argument is. Where invalid arguments have premises and a conclusion, however, the premise doesn't lead to the conclusion. There's a disconnect where clearly, just because this premise may or may not be true, would not influence the validity of the conclusion. For example, dogs have tails, therefore Bob is a whale. Meaning, just because dogs have tails or don't have tails has nothing to do about whether or not Bob is a whale. We would need something to talk about the qualities of Bob and how those correlate to a whale. Moving on to the second piece of evaluating an argument, which is the soundness. A sound argument, where it is logically valid, like we talked about before, but is also true. I'll say that again, it's also true. Like the Socrates example, that was logically valid and true. Men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, you'll see there I had examined each premise, each point, because even if just one point is false, it becomes unsound. Within an argument, you only need one. If one point is false, it is unsound. Now, another example of a sound argument is John is a mammal. All mammals have skin. John has skin. You see, this is another example of a syllogism with the information to be true. John is a mammal. And you can agree with that. All mammals have skin, which is true. So John being a mammal and mammals having skin makes John have skin, being logically valid. And mammals do have skin, and we could agree John is a mammal, making them true. Now let's look at the connection, the patterns between something being valid and sound. So you'll see logically valid arguments can be both sound or not sound because it is about structure or pattern and not truth. And sound arguments can only be valid because part of being sound is that the premises lead to the conclusion, and that only happens if it is valid. Now let's go over to some different types of arguments, where there are counterexamples, there's question begging, everyday arguments, and philosophical arguments. Where with counterexample arguments, they don't usually come with a specific conclusion sometimes, but they're more in the sense of you hear an argument that you disagree with. However, you can't just disagree to disagree, you need a reason. And for your reason to disagree with the argument, you'll look at a point that you think is wrong, and you'll give a point that goes against it. And that point will usually, let's say why that point isn't true. So that's why it's a counterexample. Keep in mind that counterexamples shouldn't be controversial. It should be clear why you're saying that point isn't true. But if it's controversial, that could lead to more argument to why something still might be true, because that person could also say, well, that thing is also false. That's not a reason to say my thing is false. For example, when we're talking about the premise, the point, it is Primaphasi wrong to kill a biologically alive things, we'd give the counterexample. we kill bacteria, mold, in plants when we eat food, and that isn't wrong. It is something that is done. People eat, and we don't call that wrong. So we can't say it is Primaphasi wrong, or even wrong, to kill biologically live things. And that can't be a reason for example, something like abortion to be wrong. We would need another reason, a different premise, to say that abortion is either wrong, permissible, or obligatory, as this one has a falseness to it. It isn't specific enough. That's where another clarity piece comes in. Now when we come to question begging, also referred to as circular reasoning, it assumes the conclusion's truth in the premise. You're trying to prove something, and to prove it, you'll give a reason that assumes only works if the conclusion is true. Now, if you're trying to prove a conclusion is true, or someone doesn't already believe the conclusion, then they can't even recognize the premise. For example, if you're talking about the truth of the Bible, how correct it is, someone will give you the argument, the Bible is always right because it is God's word, and God is always right. Therefore, the Bible is right. Now, different issues with this is, if you don't believe in God, then what reason do you have to believe that God is always right, and God's word is a reason to believe in the validity of something? You have to already believe in God's word, already believe the Bible even has God's word, to agree with the premise, which is there to prove that the conclusion of the Bible is right, is true. It's basically saying the Bible is always right because the Bible is right, therefore the Bible is right. Now, this may be logically valid, but it is not sound because it is an arbitrary argument, because it isn't giving any proof. The point of arguments are to give reason, explain why something is wrong or not. And if you just circularly say what your conclusion is, there's nothing being proved. Now, with everyday arguments, these are a little more broad, because these are a term for more common arguments you'll hear today, where a lot of times they'll often lack a depth, are false and or arbitrary, in which, as before, can include question-begging arguments, because one, they produce arbitrary points and are usually often accompanied with different arguments we'll hear today for regular things or even controversial things. For example, with abortion, you might hear the argument, abortion is murder, therefore abortion is wrong. This is a common argument of some variety of this format, but by saying abortion is murder, you're saying abortion is wrong. However, the problem with this is the word murder means wrongful killing or illegal killing. However, abortion isn't illegal, and so it leads to a contradiction, it being false. And also, it's question begging, because you're saying abortion is wrongful killing, therefore abortion is wrong. We're saying abortion is wrong, therefore abortion is wrong. You're just going in a circle as well, along with having contradictions. Also, you have homosexuality hurts the family, so homosexuality is wrong. And again, there's a falseness in the sense that a sexual orientation like homosexuality can't hurt a family. If anything, bigotry, hatred, discrimination can hurt a family. No trust, no consent, bad relationships will hurt a family. Homosexuality can't. So, we'll have to say that that argument is also wrong. But these are some examples of an everyday argument. Now we have philosophical arguments. Arguments based on philosophical or moral theories. A practice of different ideas from philosophers. Now, we haven't quite gotten to the moral theories yet, but examples of these would be arguments based on the consequences of actions, personal autonomy, humanity, etc. Now, going to those moral theories, a moral theory is a framework to determine actions to be wrong or not. You'll see, with moral or ethical reasoning, philosophical ethics, it's about deciding what makes an action wrong or not. Now, in that decision, we'll need frameworks of deciding how an action to be wrong or not. Help us get down to the specifics. Some examples of common theories are consequentialism, Kantian deontology or Kantism, Rawls' theory of justice, Ubuntu, Principalism, and Relativism. Now, with consequentialism, this moral theory is all about the consequences. When I drop a ball, there'll be consequences where that'll result in it falling, hitting the ground, either bouncing or breaking. If I open my mouth, I talk, sounds will come. There are forms of consequences. However, consequentialism is more focused on particular actions with actions that impact people, where you look at the consequences to assess the morality of it. Where a consequentialist will argue, we are obligated to do the action with the best overall consequences for all those affected. Your goal in life is to do things that do more good, an overall best consequence, versus potential harm or negative consequences. An example of this is you don't lie or steal because of the negative consequences of someone losing their own property or being deceived or hurt. It is more common, easy to understand, but also another form of consequentialism is sacrificing one to save many. The idea that you'll be doing more good and risking one life to help hundreds, tens, millions, for example. Whether it's something more like surgery, sacrifice, war, battle. If it ends with a higher positive consequence than negative consequences, then it is deemed okay. Now you can start to see where potential issues with consequentialism may arise, depending on your own beliefs. Now, with Kantism, or Kantian deontology, this was moral theory created by Kant, where it's the idea that human persons are rational creatures deserving of respect. And he created these two main categorical imperatives for everyone to follow, have to follow, even if they don't want to. Something beyond tradition or religion, just something for rational beings to follow. With the first categorical imperative being, your actions should be universalizable. In short, basically saying, don't make special exceptions to some rules just because they might benefit you in the moment, benefit you in general. For example, stealing. You want something, but you don't want to pay for it, or someone just won't give it to you, so you think, well, I'll just take it, and it'll be alright. But it's not, because you wouldn't want everyone else out there taking something from you just because you won't give it to them in a way they want it. Because we don't want people to take our stuff. We don't want people to steal from us. If we don't want people to steal from us, then to steal from them would make an ununiversalizable practice, therefore making it wrong. And the second categorical imperative is to treat people as an end in themselves. We're also saying not as mere means. And mere means to don't use someone, deceive someone, or disrespect them. You're giving them the respect they deserve as a rational being. An example of that is lying. Lying would deceive the person to what you're truly trying to get from them, truly trying to do. And deceiving them would go against the respect they deserve as persons. Now, with Rawls' theory of justice, Rawls, who created the theory, had the idea that advantages of wealth, power, and security come from luck. The idea that you're born into it. If you're born into a rich, wealthy family, you'll have money. And if you're not, you're born into poverty or just maybe middle class, then you're more likely to be the lower financial being. With power, if you're born into a family of powerful people politically or whatever kind of power, you are inclined to have that power. If you're born into a place with security, you have a roof over your head, it's warm, you have food, it'll make life a certain way versus being born into other situations where you're homeless and things like that. And the important part of this is Rawls believed using these unearned advantages to one's benefit was unfair for everyone. And justice is fairness. So he came up with this plan of deciding what is fairness in society. And he used the original position and the veil of ignorance to do that. Now, when it comes to the original position and veil of ignorance, it's this idea. Or the original position is you want to step back. Move away from your life. You're going to look at the world and decide what is fair. And to do that, we're going to look through the veil of ignorance, basically considering it could be anyone, where you don't know when you come back who you will be. And so you'll have to make decisions that would make sure that they would benefit you, not knowing who you would be. Now, for example, if you were a woman, poor, some other minority, etc., when you came back, how would you want life, society, to be fair versus being rich or powerful? You'd want to make sure the rules were to fit and be fair enough, meet the minimum standard, regardless of who you were. Which leads to Rawls' principles of justice, where, coming from this position, people can have as much freedom as allowed that people can also have an equal amount of freedom. People should not have greater freedoms than others. First principle. And the second, coming from the original position, people will only tolerate inequalities if they're assigned fairly and still benefit those who would be worst off. If you look at the bottom of the ladder, the bottom of the bunch, is life still good? What is acceptable for even the worst, as you might be part of the worst? Now, along with this, it's important to keep in mind that uh, controlling with the original position, the idea of having the best possible worst, you call that the difference principle. And when ordering what comes first, when certain things might conflict, you want to prioritize equal liberty over fair opportunity over the difference principle. An example of that is you want equal access to jobs for those who are capable. You want the liberty, the freedom to choose different jobs, and you want that opportunity of them to be open if you have the education, you are capable, you have the qualities to do such a job. And that something like a connection on the inside shouldn't be what gets you into a job, it's about your own skills. Now, move on to Ubuntu. Coming from Southern Africa, Ubuntu means humanness. This moral theory is about being human, where you could sum it up as a person is a person to other persons, or I am because we are. This idea that it's an idea of community, where even though it is self-realized, it is communitarian. It works to better the community at its core, where you want to be polite, kind, have sympathy for others, compassion, be benevolent, altruistic, forgiveness, mercy, and tolerance for your community, those around you. That is part of being a person, part of being human. If you were only by yourself, you wouldn't be human, and to mistreat other people is to be unhuman. For example of this is, you would make sure to help your neighbors when they're in need, or donate time and money to your community to benefit everyone. With principlism, this arises in the realm of medical ethics, because in different situations there are complications that arise with the different theories. Issues with consequences versus autonomy, people's different rights, and things that might conflict with each other. So Tom Buchan and James Childress developed a new approach in 1977, written in their book of that year. They came up with 4 principles to focus on, of respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Now, with respect, they're referring to respecting a person's capacity to decide for themselves. An example of that is letting capable patients deciding their treatment. When I mean by capable patients, I mean they are conscious, aware. The doctor or surgeon should allow them to decide what their treatment should be, what their surgery should be, whether or not they want treatment. Now, with non-maleficence, meaning avoiding harm, and beneficence, meaning doing good, these 2 principles are one of the main pieces of medical ethics, where medicine and surgery's goal being health. However, having to go through painful and risky treatments as the path to get to that health, that improved life. Meaning, you might have to get rid of the cancer, you have to go through risky treatment of chemotherapy, which has its own risks and dangers, or surgery, which are other risks with different surgeries, or the fact that you're breaking into the skin or to bone to fix, repair, or remove something. And for justice, it's all about the distribution of benefits and burdens in society. People getting what is fair. To do that, you have to ask who the institution serves and at what cost to whom. An example, you look at different minority services. What is available for maybe women or people of color, people who are statistically working in certain conditions that cause them certain problems, or healthcare distribution. What are the healthcare options? What are the hospitals like in your area, in your town? And how does that change if you have money in your community versus not having money? And for our last moral theory, relativism, where society's majority view determines actions to be wrong or not. Where there is no universal moral facts to have a clear cut of what is wrong, permissible, and obligatory in our world, it's left to the majority. Because societies have differing views, sometimes the same, but have differing views to what is right or wrong. And all that you can say to what is wrong at a time is really dependent on that period, that time, and what the society believed was wrong or not. An example of this is monogamy, where having one partner, that is right in a lot of places, and because the society, tradition has been, it's always been one partner. You have to have one partner because society agrees. The majority says that is right, and to go against that, that is wrong. To do something like polyamory, have multiple partners, is wrong. Or looking at male or female genital cutting. You'll see, for example, in the US, it's very common for male circumcision, and it's not considered wrong. But majority, or a people, the mass group of society, says that it's okay, it's permissible, not wrong to do, and therefore it is. And female genital cutting, female genital mutilation is wrong because the majority of society says so. And that would change in different areas where this is more of cultural relativism within the realm of relativism. You look at different areas around the world, and they'll say, based on group thought, the majority, this is right, so it is right, this is wrong, so it is wrong. And with some of those examples, you might see the potential problem of relativism, where it is controversial because of its different cases of it leading to great harm, with slavery and lack of civil rights or being able to vote in the US, and the disrespect of women to the point of physical prevention of certain jobs, or just general mistreatment that you'll find all around the world and with other minorities. And it's okay because the majority believes they're unworthy and it's okay to do that. So we should just let it be. Still, you'll see relativism in a lot of places around the world, where majority rules is what decides what is right or wrong, decides what it'll be. And you'll see that in almost every society. And though it can lead to different harm, it doesn't always. So it is to be careful, to be cautious with relativism, to make sure that it's not causing harm for people and leading to benefits in society. Now, let's evaluate some controversial arguments. First, we'll start with homosexuality. That I mentioned earlier as being an example of a controversial argument. This one is based from the Bible, saying, the Bible says homosexuality is wrong. All actions and behaviors the Bible deems wrong are wrong. Therefore, homosexuality is wrong. See, this is a syllogism, using all, deeming that homosexuality is wrong because the Bible says it is wrong. As it is a syllogism, it is logically valid. Now it is a matter of describing whether or not it is sound or not. If you look at the first premise, the Bible saying homosexuality is wrong, that is true. If you go to the Bible, it'll say it is wrong for a man to lie with a man as if a woman, referring to certain homosexual activities. So it is true the Bible says homosexuality is wrong. If you look at the second premise, that all actions the Bible deems as wrong are wrong, you're going to have to say is false. For example, the Bible said to wear mixed fabrics, mixed clothes is wrong. You can't do that, but it's not wrong. It's permissible. It's not wrong. And also, the Bible will say other things that it'll deem wrong, like women speaking in church. It'll say that as the woman isn't supposed to speak or to be quiet in the presence of the man, the church is supposed to be quiet, particularly in the sense of women, in the face of God or Jesus, and they don't have a place to speak. And it is not wrong for women to speak in church, or for them to want respect from men or a partner. So those are counterexamples of saying the second premise is false. And because one of the premises of the two are wrong, it is unsound. Therefore, we shouldn't use this argument against homosexuality being wrong. Now, if we look at the second argument, a non-religious one, saying homosexual relationships cannot reproduce. All relationships that cannot reproduce are wrong. Therefore, homosexuality is wrong. Now again, we'll look at the first premise. When it says homosexual relationships cannot reproduce, in one sense, that is true. However, this statement isn't as clear. This would be a case of, what do you mean by cannot reproduce? Where, are you just specifically saying cannot have a family? Are you saying on their own have kids? Or it's impossible for them ever to reproduce? Because if you look at those three options, homosexual couples can have a family, where there is adoption, for example. And if you talk about on their own, yes, it is true. Just two of the same sex on their own with no assistance cannot reproduce. However, we have new technology today that can help couples have kids or children with in vitro, for example. So homosexuals can have families by adoption, and there's new technology that allows people to have kids even for heterosexual relationships. So In two of those three cases, we're saying it's false. And so even though they can't do it on their own, there are different ways for homosexual relationships to reproduce. So we'll say that is false. And for the second premise, all relationships that cannot reproduce are wrong. We're going to have to disagree with that one as well. And the counter example is this. There are different heterosexual relationships that cannot reproduce. Either it is an old couple, or there's infertility problems that prevents them from reproducing. And that is not wrong. That is a matter of age or certain genetic or other problems. That is not wrong. That is permissible. Also, we shouldn't base a relationship being wrong or not off of the ability to have children. Growing the population is not obligatory. Just because you're not doing that doesn't make the action wrong. Also, this would count out things like contraceptives, like condoms or other forms of birth control. Those also block people from reproducing. Those aren't wrong as well. Therefore, both premises are false, so this argument is unsound. Or a third argument. Homosexuality is a sexual orientation. If something is a sexual orientation, then it doesn't cause harm and is permissible. Therefore, homosexuality is permissible. Now, for the first premise, homosexuality is a sexual orientation. That is true. As there's heterosexual orientations, there's bisexual orientations, and asexual orientations, and other combinations. Where being a sexual orientation just refers to what sex or gender a person is attracted to. Well, it's about the thought. Who do they think is attractive? Who they might want to be with in a romantic relationship. Homosexuality is that. First premise is true. Now for the second, if something is a sexual orientation, then it doesn't cause harm. That element is true. So if you look at it this way, like I was saying, sexual orientation is a thought, a liking, a belief. And those alone cannot do anything to a person. What causes harms are people's actions and people's words. And those aren't a sexual orientation. And also, it isn't causing harm, and therefore it is permissible. So if something doesn't cause harm physically, emotionally, spiritually, or in the long term, then it's permissible. It's not wrong to do. It's okay. Therefore, with both these premises being true, we would go to say that homosexuality is permissible. Now let's move on to abortion. First argument. Fetuses are biologically alive. If something is biologically alive, then it is Primaphasi wrong to kill. Killing fetuses are Primaphasi wrong. Now, for the first premise, fetuses are biologically alive. That is a true statement. Now, let's move on to the second. If something is biologically alive, then it is Primaphasi wrong to kill. Saying it is wrong in most cases to kill a biologically alive thing. However, we do this all the time, and we don't call it even wrong. I'll give you an example. With mold and bacteria, these are things we wash off, we kill, we sanitize to keep a healthy life. And that's permissible. You don't call that wrong. And also with plants, we cut them down to make paper or eat or do different things with plants, we don't call that wrong either. Both are biologically alive things, and if eating plants isn't wrong, and killing bacteria on something like a table or your hands isn't wrong, then I would say that it isn't prima facie wrong to kill something biologically alive, and this second premise is false. Therefore, making the argument killing fetuses are prima facie wrong as unsound. Now, let's look at our second argument. The fetus does not have autonomy over a woman's body. If the fetus does not have autonomy over a woman's body, then it is permissible for a woman to use her autonomy to alter her body. Therefore, removing the fetus is permissible. Now let's examine this. The first argument, the fetus does not have autonomy over the woman's body. If we look at Continuism about persons' respect and autonomy, people being their own ends, the fetus has its own autonomy and the woman has her own autonomy, and it would be wrong to have claim over that autonomy. So the first premise is true. The fetus does not have autonomy over the woman's body. The woman has control. Now for our second premise. The fetus does not have autonomy over the woman's body, then it's permissible for the woman to use her autonomy to alter her body. And we're going to say this is also true. Given the example, if a person was unconsensually connected to another person, as a lifeline to them, she having autonomy, or they have autonomy over their body, disconnect, as other people don't have claim to their body. They have autonomy to themselves, and it's their decision to lend their body to other beings with autonomy. Making this statement true. Permissible. And then, so with both premises being true, it would make this conclusion true, that removing the fetus is permissible because this is the woman altering her body. Because the fetus is in her body, part of her body. She's altering, the act of removing part of the body. And it's permissible as it is within her own autonomy, and no one outside of her or inside of her has autonomy over her body. Now we'll look at our third and final argument for abortion. Fetuses have valuable futures. All things with valuable futures are prima facie wrong to kill. Therefore, killing fetuses are prima facie wrong. Let's look at the first premise. Fetuses have valuable futures. Now, this is kind of a situation where we're going to talk about what do you mean. There's certain unclarities. When we're talking about valuable futures, you could be referring to happy lives, might go on to great things, or the idea that they just might have some biological existence in some time in the future. Now, another thing to consider is, when it comes to the future, you need to have a concept of time. Without time, there is no future. And fetuses don't have a concept of time. They have underdeveloped brains, so they lack this concept of time. they don't truly have the sense of different relationships, emotions, to the point to where they're building relationships, having goals, having dreams, having different things to do that would be filling this future, something to push towards. Fetuses aren't working to boost their future. And also, futures are unpredictable. And we can't say for sure that the fetus will even survive the pregnancy or come to being to have actual good futures or positive or even negative futures. So we're going to have to disagree with fetuses having valuable futures. So with the second premise, all things with valuable futures are Primaphasi wrong to kill. Now, if you look at this, it makes sense. If something has a valuable future, it would be Primaphasi wrong to kill. In most cases, you would try to avoid killing something with a valuable future. You'd want to preserve it. So, it would make this premise true. Now, looking at both the first and second premise, we have the first false and the second true. With one being false, it leaves our conclusion to be unsound. And that is our view of philosophical ethics. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day. This has been Donovan Jones Myers, signing out.